About 8 years of Newt Gingrich spent working for Freddie Mac have now followed him to Iowa today.
I was approached to offer strategic advice. I was glad to offer strategic advice, and we did it for a number of companies, and Gingrich Group was very successful.
Do you think you were sort of just being bought to be there?
No, I don't think that. No, I don't think that any more than your institution's being bought when people advertise in it.
Gingrich is only the latest in a string of Republicans this year to enjoy a boomlet in the polls, but has his bubble, or is it about to burst as well for the second time around this summer? Stu Rothenberg is editor of the Rothenberg Political Report and a columnist for Roll Call, and Jonathan Alter, our friend, is also an MSNBC political analyst and Bloomberg View columnist. Welcome to both. Stu, you wrote about Newt Gingrich this week. He had the rise, the fall, a rise again, but now he's being hit with these questions, first raised by John Harwood on the CNBC debate last week about $300,000 paid to him by Freddie Mac. Now he's saying it was paid to the Gingrich Company, and Bloomberg is reporting today that it was $1.6 million, a number that Gingrich is not disputing. First of all, the question, he's making a distinction between a strategic consultant and a lobbyist. Is that, as Chris Salissa said earlier in the program, a distinction without a difference to the average voter? And does this make him more of a Washington insider? He took this position shortly after leaving the Speaker's job.
Well, I heard Chris's comments, and I think he's absolutely right. Generally, Andrea, this was very predictable, this focus on him. You know, when he was irrelevant in the race, we could all ignore him. And now that he becomes a top contender, he's going to get this scrutiny. His immediate reaction was, I'm a historian. I was giving historical advice. Just won't seem to fly to many people. They weren't asking him about the Peloponnesian Wars. This was, you know, what he could do for them in pursuing their own agenda. So I think this is the kind of drip of politics that we have come to see when a controversy gets started, and there are going to be more of these down the road for the former Speaker. And in fact, Jonathan, we're still working on this. We've been reporting it all day, but there apparently was a fine that Freddie Mac had to pay $3.8 million to the Federal Election Commission for they didn't agree. It was a consent agreement, so they didn't cite them or agree that there was any wrongdoing here, but they did pay $3.8 million for apparently improper contributions to political candidates and for failing to document some of the fundraising that they did for politicians and for hiring consultants. And we don't know yet whether the Gingrich Group was one of the consultants involved, but for hiring consultants to effort that fundraising.
Well, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac have become kind of toxic, especially in the Republican Party. There are Democrats who've had connections with those institutions who have also suffered. You may recall that Jim Johnson, who was supposed to head the Obama transition, had to back out in part because of his connections to Freddie and Fannie. But I don't agree that this is necessarily fatal to Newt Gingrich's chances, and I think there's still a pretty good opportunity for him to emerge as the main challenger to Mitt Romney. Now, that doesn't mean he's necessarily going to beat Romney, but Romney has not closed the sale with the Republican Party, and it's just amazing to me that he's running third behind Gingrich and Kaine, although Kaine is fading in a couple of recent polls. So it's quite possible that Newt Gingrich will weather this. He has about a dozen more debates where he does quite well to move past this, as he has moved past earlier controversies in this campaign.
Well, he's been incredibly resilient, but let me just also show you another issue, which is today's Washington Times, a conservative journal, as you know here, and this headline is Gingrich campaign platform at odds with planks from the past, pointing out that he made accommodations with Bill Clinton, that all of that deficit reduction and balanced budgeting that he was doing was with Democrats in Congress and, you know, obviously also Republicans in Congress when he was Speaker, but also with a Democratic White House.
Right, and he actually was critical earlier this year of the Ryan plan, which is very popular within the Republican Party. So there are a series of landmines. We haven't even talked about the money from Tiffany's, the revolving line of credit he had there, and the questions he had to answer about that. And as Stewart indicated, as he becomes a more serious candidate, these questions will keep coming. And to say that he has baggage is rather an understatement. You know, he was fined and sanctioned as he left the speakership close to 15 years ago. So there's a lot to go over here in the Gingrich record. But he is, as you say, he's extremely resilient. And, Andrea, there's a process of elimination that's going on now in this Republican primary contest. There are not a lot of other candidates. You know, are they going to turn to Rick Santorum?
Well,
at a certain point, the Republicans are going to have to make accommodations. And if they don't want Romney, they're going to have to look to somebody else.
Well, Romney is the obvious fallback position. But let me ask you again about Gingrich, Stu. Is there a conflict between Gingrich, Mr. Outside, appealing to the Republican conservative base and to Tea Partiers, and Gingrich, Mr. Inside, running the Gingrich Company, which sounds as though he is the principal of it? So whoever got this money from Freddie Mac, a lot of it had to be filtering through to him.
No, I think absolutely there's a contradiction here, and I think it will make some Republicans, conservatives, uncomfortable. The reality is it's really hard for the former Speaker of the United States and now a guy who is a Washington insider to run as an outsider. Of course he wants to do that. That's the vacuum in the Republican race as the alternative to the establishment candidate. But he really isn't in an ideal position to do that. And I think it is important to note this one question about Freddie Mac and how much money he made. That's one problem he has. But when you look at his record on the individual mandate, Medicare Part D, a number of issues that conservatives will become very agitated about, that seems to be a bigger problem. Herman Cain has had a personal problem, and that has rallied some conservatives. Newt has multiple problems. Some of them are ideological.
Stu Rothenberg, thank you very much. And Jonathan Alter, thanks for being with us.